What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt back here with Mike Kaye a couple days after the draft ended to give you a little recap show. We've calmed down a little bit from our previous pod where we were pretty up in arms about Jalen Hurts' pick. I want to mention that we apologize that our podcasts haven't been going up on YouTube the last couple times. We're dealing with some technical stuff. We're hoping to get that resolved. Hopefully this one will get up on YouTube. Either way, keep sending us tweets, or I've gotten some tweets about the last pod, and write some reviews, and we'll try and get to them if we can, because YouTube's usually where we get our comments. But keep sending Mike text. But anyway, so the draft's over. The Eagles added, how many players did they wind up adding in total?
So 24 players in total, 13 undrafted free agents, 10 draft picks, and then one really fast veteran.
Yeah, and then a trade. Yeah. So they added quite a few players, which is something that Jeffrey Lurie has pretty much said. He said last year at the owners' meetings that they're going to be adding a lot of young guys over the next couple of years. That lived up to it. The third day was extremely interesting. I think we should go through those guys. We'll do that at the top of the podcast. But just as you sit here 2 days from the draft, what was your? I know you did grades for everything, but what was your overall grade for their draft class? We'll get into the individual stuff, but just like general themes, like how'd you feel about this draft?
I give him a B-. I share a different philosophy maybe than a lot of people, but I view second round picks as like first round light. And I am very, very interested in the study of second round picks. I'm bullish about their value. And so I might have graded their second round pick of Jalen Hurts, or weighted it a lot differently than most people would have. Just from a value, from a team perspective. Not about the player. The player's very talented and can develop into a pretty good quarterback. My issue is with value need, how it affects the current guy at the top of the totem pole and stuff like that. I thought their day three, I've been covering the draft as a blogger or beat writer for a dozen years, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone maneuver the back of the draft the way Howie Roseman did on Saturday. It was like putting on a clinic, I said. Everybody wants to talk about how day three guys have a very low success rate, but when you have so many picks late, it helps your success rate. I think that's something that's lost. I thought they did a very good job from Kavon Wallace to Casey Toohill. I think they got guys that fit their philosophies, that fit their locker room. And they made one pick that we'll talk about later that I think really, really could turn out to be a huge blessing for this franchise.
Yeah, I think I know which one it is. But like on your point about the day three thing, it certainly is smart to take a lot of swings instead of taking one swing. So in the theory being, like all these receivers they drafted plus Goodwin, you hope at least one or two of them pan out. And if that's the case, then their receiver group is better than it was last year. But
yeah, for sure.
I just blanked on what I was going to say.
Well, what I'll add is, too, if you look at it, they had 10 picks this year. They had 5 the year before and 5 the year before that.
I know.
So they added both of their picks for the last 2 years together, and I think that they'll benefit from that. You look at, they had 7 picks on day 3 and did so in a smart way. They never traded down from the 3rd. They never traded down in the 2nd. They didn't trade down in the 1st, but they were still able to accomplish their goal of picking double-digit prospects, and I think that'll help them, with their success rate moving forward.
But yeah, so the point I was trying to make was the Eagles went into this offseason where we all universally agreed that wide receiver was their biggest weakness, and the only players they added are day 3 picks, Jalen Reagor, and a 29-year-old receiver who's never been healthy. Like, I know they're taking a lot of swings, and a lot of these guys are intriguing, but I don't know if they necessarily got better in the way that everybody thought they needed to at wide receiver, and surrounding Carson Wentz with talent, which kind of ties back into the Jalen Hurts conversation. They didn't really add any skill position guys that have like a history of success in the NFL, is how I would phrase it.
You mean this offseason in general?
Yeah,
right?
This offseason. Yeah, this offseason in general.
So let's go individually through these wide receivers. So Jalen Reagor, I spoke to a general manager and I spoke to an offensive coordinator the last 2 days. The offensive coordinator told me that the Eagles were very smart to take him where they did. The general manager said that he was going to be selected in the next 5 to 10 picks. So if he was their guy, it was the right move to make. So that means that he was not going to escape the first round. It wasn't going to happen. I've also been told that teams like the Vikings and Saints were believed to like Rager quite a bit. So when you consider that from a value standpoint, I guess, in turn, like we said, if he's your speedster, if that's the philosophy you're going to go with, he was a smart pick. Marquise Goodwin, I reported the other day, shortly after the trade, that he reworked his contract. He was set to make $3.95 million with one more year left on his contract that would balloon up, I believe, to $8 million. The Eagles did some clever, calculating and got him down to $1.35 million on a one-year deal. So they ripped up his former contract. They traded for his contract, then ripped it up. I believe he will make the roster. I think they're going to use him more in the slot than he's previously been used before, and I think that's important given his need to have space and his ability to move laterally. I think there's a video moving around the internet where he beat Patrick Peterson basically off the line, and Patrick Peterson wanted no part of him, and he took a slant and took it to the end zone. I wasn't a huge fan of the trade initially, or the idea of the trade, but they got him for falling back 20 spots in the 6th round, got his contract down to half of what it was. He'll have $1 million in incentive bonuses, but I don't know if he really makes those. I'm not sure what those incentives are. It might be for playing a full 16-game season, and if that's the case, history shows that probably not going to happen. So,
he's only played 16 games once, and he's only had more than 430 receiving yards once, and he has a career catch percentage of 50.
Right. So you're taking a shot here. And speaking of taking a shot, John Hightower from Boise State, this kid has yak ability. He's the guy that I think they wanted Matt Collins to be. They're not completely similar players, but from an offensive standpoint, a deep threat with some size is what I think they viewed Matt Collins as. You remember the one touchdown he had the 2017 season was pretty explosive. He got free down the field. I think he ran a go route and caught a touchdown pass from Wentz. So I think Hightower's got some really good upside. I think he needs to work on getting off the line of scrimmage against press. He's a Z receiver. So are Rager and Goodwin. So it'll be interesting to see what they do there, especially with Deshaun Jackson being there. I think all of these guys that they've drafted can play Z in the slot. So Z is the flanker. You get extra space, so you're not dealing with as much press. The X position is where you're up on the line and you're probably dealing with press. Think the Alshon Jeffrey role. So then they go and they draft Southern Miss wide receiver Quez Watkins in the 6th round. I like him. He was extremely productive at his school. That said, struggles to get off press. I don't know what position he'll play. He's got decent size, but I don't really know if his route running is kind of up to par. I got to watch a little bit more tape on him. I had a discussion with him at the combine. He was sitting alone at the combine table because just to give you some insight, you see all the press conferences set up where the guys are at the podium, but then they have other guys kind of at tables, and he was just sitting there. So I was working on a wide receiver route story of what guys' favorite routes were. And he said that his favorite route was a slant. And I asked him why, and he gave me this convoluted answer. And then I asked him about who he models his game after. He said DeAndre Hopkins, Stephon Diggs, and somebody else. And went off on a tangent for roughly 12 minutes. It was funny. It was well beyond the necessary need of this conversation. But he really loves football. You can tell he's a guy who's going to be good in the locker room. So I think he's more practice squad likely. He seems like a long-term developmental project, but the first 3 guys they got in that wide receiver room, I think, can have an impact this year.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. Did they sign any undrafted receivers?
Yeah, well, your guy, former quarterback.
Yeah, sure. They we'll talk about that stuff later. I couldn't remember. Is he the only one?
No, they signed this guy from Morgan State. He's a project. He's got really good size for the position. I'm going to probably butcher his name, but it's what is his name? I'm trying here. Manasseh Bailey. There
There you go.
he's
He's from Morgan State. Yeah.
Yeah, he's 6'1", 195, good size. I was actually pretty surprised by their undrafted free agent haul, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, there wasn't as many like exciting names as they usually have, I feel like. But I mean, so obviously the theme of this Eagles draft was speed. They went speed in pretty much every possible way, even including linebacker. Let's go through each of the. I mean, you covered the receivers, so we can skip over them. But let's go through their other picks. The first one they had in the 4th round was Kaye Wallace, right?
Right. But actually, you know what? We barely touched on Davian Taylor.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
So let's talk about
we
him.
can start with that. Yeah, go ahead.
So initially, I projected him as possibly a middle linebacker. The more that I've watched and the more that I've read, I actually think he's probably a better fit for the weak side linebacker position, which is actually really helpful for Nathan Gary's career progression. I don't know if it's really helpful for the Eagles. I think Nathan Gary might actually be the starting middle linebacker this year. If not, he might be the Sam linebacker, and TJ Edwards would be the middle linebacker, which makes more sense from a body and play standpoint. Because you'd have Gary cover tight ends, which he's the best coverage linebacker they have by a mile. And then you would have, TJ Edwards as a run-stopping presence. You take him off the field in nickel situations, and it would probably be Taylor playing the weak side and Gary playing the middle. So, Taylor's an interesting guy. He's a bit of a project. Didn't play a lot of high school ball, but in college he's just got such raw athletics. There's a video going around of him stopping a 70-yard touchdown when Colorado's down like 38 to something, to Oregon or Baylor. Or so he's a guy that I think is going to fit this locker room really, really well. I could see him becoming a D'Amico Ryans type because he is so athletic. People don't realize that D'Amico Ryans, when he came out of school, was a very, very athletic middle linebacker when he went to Houston. And obviously the Eagles got him later on in his career, but he was an athletic force. And I think Davian Taylor can have a similar impact. I really like his upside. For the immediate, impact, I think he's probably going to play will linebacker. So let's get into Kavon Wallace, who I think is their best pick of this draft from a value standpoint.
And he's winning over Eagles fans really quick. His Twitter has been really fun to look at, and his Instagram. He's just like he's really embracing Philadelphia already. I know at the end of his Zoom call, he like did a bird and said "Fly Eagles fly" or whatever.
Yeah, he's a guy that guys are going to like. He went to college with Brian Dawkins' son. Obviously, he's a fellow Clemson alum. He's a versatile guy. Now, most teams are going to project him as a strong safety. That's probably where he's going to make his money long term, and I think he's perfect for that. He is a phenomenal blitzer. He's very good at stopping the run. He's a guy that I think they will kind of maneuver around the way they maneuvered around Malcolm Jenkins. And comparing him to Malcolm Jenkins or Brian Dawkins is not fair. But I do think he has the ability to play multiple roles. He can play nickel corner. He can play the big nickel and dime packages. He can, in a pinch, play free safety, but he's probably going to play strong safety. I also think this impacts Will Parks, who I think will play more free safety now. He'll probably be the immediate backup to Rodney McLeod as opposed to the immediate backup for Jalen Mills, who I think will initially win the starting strong safety job. But what's interesting is having Wallace here gives them some help in case Avonte Maddox and Sidney Jones underperform in training camp at cornerback. You can move Mills back to corner and have Kavon Wallace start at strong safety while you figure out what you're doing with Avonte Maddox, Nicole Roby-Coleman, and Sidney Jones. But yeah, I think Kavon Wallace does so much for the secondary from a projection standpoint that you feel really good, even though they didn't draft another corner, which I had actually said in my final thoughts about the draft that I didn't think they were going to draft another corner because of how confident they were in Avonte Maddox and Sidney Jones. Plus, they have so many nickel corners that if Trevor Williams, Cravon LeBlanc, and Nicole Roby-Coleman don't work out, they can always put the loser of Sidney Jones versus Avonte Maddox in the slot. So, again,
and then you still have Rasul Douglas is still on the roster, by the way.
Right, and I think, when we look at the winners and losers from this draft, I didn't really have a guy in the secondary who lost from this because Kavon Wallace gives you the versatility to move guys around. I think it gives Will Parks a defined role as probably the backup free safety / the big nickel, depending on the team. I think they're going to use that big nickel position now based on matchups. If a team is very run heavy, maybe Kavon Wallace starts at the big nickel position. If a team's very pass heavy, Will Park starts there. So there's a lot to like about this pick and how it impacts the secondary.
Yeah, I was a big fan of that. I mean, he was a guy that a lot of people had been like projecting to the Eagles in like 7-round mock drafts.
Sure.
I think he made a lot of sense. The next pick is what I thought was an interesting one too. They got Jack Driscoll from Auburn. He's a guy who it sounds like projects as like a guard or maybe a right tackle or something like that. But I saw something that they might try and work him at center or something like that. And if that's the case, then he becomes infinitely more valuable as like a developmental guy. I mean, they don't necessarily have to do that though, because Sayamalo could in theory replace Kelsey down the line. But what do you make of Driscoll?
I like the pickup. He was a guy that I really kind of liked as kind of a John Runyon style right tackle. He's got pretty tight dimensions. He's not very long armed. He doesn't have a lot of length. Long armed, but he just doesn't have a lot of length, and so I think that's why you're seeing a lot of people project him to guard. If he plays center, I mean, like you said, his value is tremendous. They needed to come out of this draft or undrafted free agency with the successor to Jason Kelsey, who sounds like this could be the last year for him. I don't want to speculate too much, but he contemplates retirement almost every offseason. So Driscoll's a good character guy. He seems like a guy that can play multiple roles. Kind of think Matt Pryor, but with a little bit more polish. Remember, we've talked about how they have Jordan Mailata. They've got guys who don't have a ton of experience, or they played in the Pac-12 where there's very different pass rush, very different type of athletes. Driscoll's coming from the SEC. So, he's got experience blocking against pretty phenomenal pass rushers. And so I think having that experience as an offensive tackle in that conference and then potentially moving to guard or center is very, very good for him. I think long-term he projects as the swing interior lineman, especially if they think Matt Pryor can be, maybe the backup right tackle, because they seem to like that. They seem to like sides as opposed to actual positions. So that's interesting to me. I think this is a bad pick for Sua Opeta, Nate Herbig, and Jordan Mailata, though.
Yeah, I think those guys kind of come out of this draft not feeling great because they got two guys. Obviously, we'll get to the other guy later. But all right, we already talked about John Hightower, who came in the 5th round. In the 6th round, I picked 7'6" center Sean Bradley from Temple. The Eagles hope that this Sean Bradley works out a little better. Spells differently. Local kid. It sounded like it was a cool moment for him. My impression just from reading about him is that he's probably at best a special teams guy with you hope for more because he's a good athlete. But what do you think about this pick?
He's Kamu Grugier-Hill. That's who he is.
Yeah, that's what I thought when I was reading about him.
Yeah. So for me, I worry about Jatavis Brown for his roster sake, because they already have what they call the Fab Five in that room. It's Nathan Gary, TJ Edwards, Alex Singleton, Duke Riley, and cornerback Craig James. Those are their 5 aces on special teams, and bringing in Sean Bradley, who is going to probably replace Kamu Grugier-Hill and probably knock Craig James out of the group because there's so much talent at cornerback, projected talent, I should say. I think that's where he's going to make his bones. Jatavis is signed to a league minimum deal, and with the inclusion of Davian Taylor and Sean Bradley, I think he's going to have a tough time making this roster. To me, Sean Bradley is what Paul Worlow was going to be. He's what Kamu was. He's best projected at weak side linebacker, but they already have like 5 guys that can play weak side linebacker. So like you said, special teams is probably where he's going to make his bones. He's a local kid. He's used to playing in the link. His father is a Giants fan. And apparently the second that phone rang, he switched to Eagles gear. So there's another guy who's listening to this podcast probably. But yeah, I think Sean's going to be very good from a leadership standpoint too. I think he's a future special teams captain.
All right. So clearly they wanted to address the linebacker position in terms of depth, by the way, because I got 2 guys there.
Smart move.
All right. The next one is the one that we've kind of both been waiting to talk about, I think. It's definitely the best value based on where a guy was projected. It's Auburn offensive tackle Prince Tega Wanogho, Wanogho, however you say it. Teammates with Jack Driscoll. Talent wise, like this is the potential to be like an absolute steal, but there's also a better than not chance that he doesn't amount to anything and he never plays a snap for the Eagles. He had
Womp,
a
womp,
medical.
womp.
I just think it's important to say that for a 6th round pick.
Sure.
He had a bad enough medical red flag that he fell from a round 2 to 3 grade all the way to the 6th round. But it's the kind of pick that's really smart to make. It's a swing. It's a lottery ticket. He seems like a guy that's a candidate to be a medical redshirt this year, like Mailata has been the last 2 years. But it's really this is my favorite pick they had, maybe besides Kayvon Wallace. You get a guy with that value late. He's a guy who started for 3 years at Auburn, and I think I heard a stat that he didn't even allow a sack last year. So the knee issue had to be pretty serious if that's all the case. And but this is definitely like a cool pick, and I think it could amount to something. It sounds like he has a really cool story where he like came to America with $20 in his pocket or something like that.
Yeah, he's a guy who's got a great story. He's a guy that, to me, is, like you said, he's got experience. He's played against the top pass rushers in the SEC, and for me, this is found money, right? Like you look in the couch cushion and you find $20. I actually think having him as a long-term backup might be better for his career. You're not counting on him from the perspective of playing time. So if he has those knee issues, he is only insurance, And I think, if stuff goes wrong with Andre Dillard, there were rumors flying around draft weekend. If Prince lives up to the hype of his pre-draft, grading, I think you're in really good shape. I think he could, at worst, be the next Big V.
Yeah, I mean, this is a low risk, high reward draft pick, and it's a type that if he becomes what he was supposed to, then Howie looks like a genius for picking him.
Yeah, for sure. And then their last pick.
And so we talked about Marquise Goodwin, who wasn't a draft pick technically, but so Casey Hill from Stanford. By all accounts, he was more of a 3-4 like outside edge rusher kind of player, but the Eagles are going to play him at defensive end, it sounds like, and if that's the case, he's kind of undersized. Although he is a great athlete, which is clearly what they emphasized in this draft.
To me, he's going to be a guy who's like Sharif Miller, a guy who they like his physical tools, but he needs a lot of polish. He needs a lot of work, which is rough because he's already, I think, 24 or 20. He's like 23 and change. So, he did put his hand down quite a bit at Stanford. I actually like him from a measurement standpoint as a Sam linebacker. I doubt they move him there. Especially if they're planning on featuring Gary or Edwards or Taylor in that role. But he's an interesting cat. I think he's probably practice squad bound. But, I could see him competing with Osman and Deshaun Hall and Sharif Miller for a job. I think Sharif Miller won big by them not drafting a defensive end earlier. I think Josh Sweat won pretty big too. Josh Sweat's clearly their number 3 defensive end, the first guy off the bench. So, that's kind of my thought process. I haven't watched enough of Casey to be like, yeah, he's going to do this or that, but it's a flyer. He's probably a guy that they really wanted in undrafted free agency, and if they couldn't get a deal done or maybe a team agreed to something earlier, they went for him. You know what I mean? Like if a team like Washington or Dallas had agreed to terms with him, they just said, screw it, we'll just draft him.
Makes sense. All right, now we can talk a little bit. We don't need to delve too deeply, but we can talk about the undrafted free agent class. I'll just go through a few of the names that are at least interesting to me, and then you can tell me who you think are like the most likely to have a shot, I guess.
Sure.
Oregon State tight end Noah Togiai. I don't know. That's a tough one.
I think it's
Tugwai from Oregon State. Luke Jariga, center from Western Michigan. Khalil Tate, he was a quarterback at Arizona, but they announced him as a wide receiver. Adrian Killens, running back from UCF. Baylor safety, Graylin Arnold. And I think that's the only ones that really intrigue me all that much. And Michael Warren from Cincinnati. I actually thought he was going to... Oh, and Raekwon Williams from Michigan State, too, actually. Defensive tackle. So that's a running back and a defensive tackle. Those two seem like the most likely to make the team, probably, but you would have a better grasp of that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you cut out.
Raekwon Williams and Michael Warren were the last two I mentioned.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think Taguai, who I reported got 100,000 guaranteed to sign, and then Juriga, who got 116,000 to sign. I think those are the two guys that make the most sense of making the roster. This isn't a very good undrafted free agency class, just from projections of guys who might have been drafted or might not have been. But Adrian Killens is very fun. Braylon Arnold is a ball hawk at safety. Dante Olson's a very, very productive player from Montana. And Julian Good Jones is kind of like a dark horse candidate. He's definitely
What a
got
great name.
Yeah. Is he Good Jones? But he looks like an NFL left tackle. He kind of reminds me of you might remember him back in the day, Kevin Graff, who like stuck around forever after going undrafted at a UCF, but he never really played. The guy who probably benefits most from signing here is Michael Warren from Cincinnati. The team has 5 running backs, and he's really the only bulldozer. I mean, you could say Elijah Holyfield's got some power behind him, but like Warren is like a wrecking ball. So that's interesting. Raekwon Williams, I'm not really sure why he signed here. I don't know how he makes this team, but he's probably the most well-known guy on the list. And then Prince Smith is the local Philly guy who went to New Hampshire and did some things.
Yeah. So I should say I covered Khalil Tate at Arizona. I think he's in. So the initial reaction when I reported that he was signed, because I had a feeling maybe he wouldn't be a quarterback here, but I wasn't sure. So everybody kind of immediately responded with like the quarterback factory jokes, and the idea everybody thought like he was the next Taysom Hill. And in theory, it made more sense than Jalen Hurts because he's not as good of a thrower, but he's a great athlete and all that. And Taysom Hill was an undrafted guy, but it sounds like they're going to try him at receiver. He's a really good athlete. I talked to his high school coach yesterday, and he said he was like there had been a bunch of times where he had a practice at receiver for them, and he said he looked better at receiver than anybody he's ever coached. And he coached at that high school Marquise Lee, Deontay Burnett, Robert Woods, and somebody else, and he thought he looked as good as those guys. I mean, it's not like a game situation, so take that with a grain of salt. Just pointing out that like there's potential here if they want to like develop this kid. I do think there's some immaturity with him, and his career kind of tailed off after he had a phenomenal year in 2017 where he ran for almost 2,000 yards and he didn't even play the whole season. His first game he ever played is one of the craziest I've ever seen, where he came in as a backup after the starter got hurt, and he ran for 327 yards against Colorado. But he's kind of like a fun training camp guy, most likely, and maybe if he shows enough, they keep him on the practice squad and try and develop him as a Greg Ward type of guy.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I mean, look, a lot of these guys scream practice squad, but there's only 10 spots on a practice squad, and we're coming in.
Aren't they expanding the practice squads this year?
I think it's next year when they go to more games, but also we have to keep in mind, the situation that's off season is not ideal for rookies, and
that's a good point. Yeah.
There isn't going to be a rookie camp. There probably isn't going to be OTAs. So,
which is where those guys get their first chance to prove themselves too.
Right, and it's the one place where Jalen Reagor probably could have been the lone quarterback at practice too. So
they didn't sign any. Maybe that's why they didn't sign any quarterbacks in this undrafted class.
Well, I believe Lauletta, since he's technically second year,
probably would have been there.
Yeah. Or they, the thing is too is you'll notice with some teams that they didn't rush to fill out their roster because there's no tryouts right now for rookies. Rookie minicamp typically has like 40 guys come to camp to try out, and maybe 2 of those guys make a roster. Those 2 guys won't get the chance this year, or at least anytime soon. So I'm interested to see how the NFL handles that. I think it would probably be a really good PR move to host like a once this is all said and done, to host like kind of like an undrafted combine for guys who kind of were overlooked. But we'll see how that goes. But overall, like I said, I give this a B-. I think the undrafted class is a C+. There's some interesting guys. Juriga, like when you read about him, reads as like a bigger Jason Kelsey. And then, Tawagai, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's the only tight end they signed. They gave him $100,000 guaranteed. And all he has to do is beat out Josh Perkins and Alex Ellis to get the job. So those are the two guys that I'm really looking at. I think, Tate's a really interesting story, but, ultimately it's going to matter how fast he picks things up. And
yeah, I mean, the odds are stacked against him pretty significantly.
for sure.
But yeah, so I think we covered everything with the draft. I think we can look ahead a little bit right here. We talked about this a little bit off the pod, but as of later today, this pod will be up, but before then, right? It's 4 p.m. today.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So as of 4 p.m. today, the players that were eligible to like cost compensatory picks or whatever won't anymore. Like the compensatory deadline is 4 p.m. essentially. So you'll see a lot of guys, maybe not right away, but there'll be a lot of unrestricted free agents that maybe start signing. Maybe you'll see someone like Jadeveon Clowney finally sign somewhere. There's some pretty good free agents that are still on the market. So is there any position before we get into like names? Is there any position in particular you think the Eagles try and hit if they sign any of these guys?
I mean, left tackle, swing tackle would make a lot of sense. Kelvin Beachum from the Jets is a guy that I've kind of said makes sense for them. He's a swing tackle. That's what he is. But he has a ton of starting experience. And if they're uncomfortable with Andre Dillard, bringing in a veteran makes sense. And then I think corner makes a lot of sense. I really like Logan Ryan a lot. Like Nicole Roby-Coleman's been great. And they have Avonte Maddox and they have Sidney Jones. But I think Logan Ryan's the type of playmaker you want at that nickel position. So maybe they just add him. I mean, Nicole Roby-Coleman's here on a minimum contract. So is Crevon LeBlanc. So if you're really set on having that competition between Jones and Avonte Maddox on the outside, bringing in Logan Ryan doesn't really hurt you very much.
Yeah, I think one position I'd keep an eye on is running back.
Sure, yeah.
I know you mentioned a running back in your story you posted earlier today. They didn't draft any, obviously. So Boston Scott and Miles Sanders are based. I mean, I guess Elijah Holyfield and those undrafted guys, but I mean, there's a bunch of veterans here they can get low cost. I don't think they're going to sign LaShawn McCoy. You can kind of give up on that dream. You mentioned you have Chris Thompson in yours, or
yeah.
You have Chris Thompson. He's a pass catcher. Carlos Hyde's a free agent. Frank Gore would be a fun retire in the team that he was the best on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, whatever.
Corey Clement could come back. That doesn't have to do
right.
that doesn't have to do with compensatory. I mean, it's not an exciting group of free agents, but I mean, Lamar Miller, if he was going to willing to sign for cheap, I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
Any other guys you had your eye on?
No, that would be it for me. I don't really think there's a ton of guys out there, but I do think they'll sign one or two guys. Yeah, I'm interested to see what happens with Vinny Curry now.
Yeah.
And
one more thing that's coming up soon is the Eagles are going to have to decide about Derek Barnett's 5th-year option by next week, I believe. So what do you think? I'm assuming they're going to exercise that, right?
Yeah. Had they drafted somebody early, I would have said no, but I think, I think that's pretty inevitable, yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting that they usually draft a defensive end every year, and Casey Toohill was the only one, and he's a 7th-round pick. So maybe they're confident in Josh Sweat taking the next step, or Sharif Miller becoming something, or the God Joe Osman.
Yeah, hey, the God.
The God. Anything else you want to say before we head out of here?
Nope, I'm good, man. I think, I think this was a productive draft class. Do I think it was a great one? No, but I think it was very productive. And I think, for all the heat that Howie took on day 2, I think keeping into perspective the Jalen Reagor pick and how the league viewed him as opposed to the media. And then I also think looking at day 3 in general and the work he did deserved praise. So like I said, solid B-. I probably wouldn't go either way. I wasn't leaning towards C+. I wasn't leaning towards B. I think it's a straight B-, which is better than their previous 2 drafts, in my opinion.
All right, we can we'll wrap up on that note. Hopefully this one gets on YouTube, and if it does, send us some comments, and we'll try and hit you guys up again maybe in a week or so.
Deuces.